From tomorrow, we'll be living with Mom. Clear out your room because she's moving in, George said with a tone that left no room for discussion. I stared at him, trying to process his words. My heart sank, and my mind raced with a mix of disbelief and anger. Ever since visiting his parents' house months ago, I had feared this moment. Yet I never thought it would arrive so soon. Understood, I replied, my voice trembling slightly. I'll call the movers. George's expression shifted to confusion. Why would you call movers? He asked, genuinely puzzled. I forced a smile and said, because we're getting a divorce. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. George's face froze in shock, his mouth opening and closing as though he were searching for a response, but couldn't find one. I had prepared for this moment, a decision that had been simmering since the day I discovered the truth about him and his mother. My name is Isabella Clark. I'm 38 years old and work in the sales department of a multinational consulting firm. For as long as I can remember, I've been driven by ambition, excelling academically, and building a career I was proud of. But the same couldn't be said for my personal life. A year ago, I decided to take a chance on love. I turned to a dating app and met George. He was 34, charming, and seemingly kind-hearted. Despite his modest job at a local automotive factory, he exuded a warmth that was hard to resist. He said he admired my independence and joked that older women were his type. Flattered and hopeful, I let my guard down. Our relationship progressed rapidly. Within 6 months, we were married. At the time, I believed I had found my partner for life. But as they say, appearances can be deceiving. The cracks began to show shortly after we moved into the high-rise apartment I had purchased. It was near his parents' home, a compromise I made to make him happy. But it soon became clear that compromise was a one-sided agreement. The first sign of trouble came in the form of my mother-in-law. She visited our home frequently, each time finding something she liked and taking it with her. "Oh, I've always wanted a vase like this. Can I borrow it?" she'd say. Despite her promises to return the items, they never came back. When I brought this up to George, he dismissed it. "It's just a vase, Isabella. Besides, you make a good income. What's the big deal?" His indifference stung, but I brushed it off, hoping things would improve. They didn't. Instead, my mother-in-law's demands grew. She called me at work with errands, showed up unannounced, and even criticized the way I decorated our home. George, rather than standing by me, enabled her behavior. "She's my mom," he'd say. "We should be grateful she's in our lives." Grateful? For what? Being treated like a doormat? The breaking point came when George's father had a fall and was hospitalized. While visiting him, he confided in me, revealing something that left me reeling. "Isabella, I'm sorry you married into this family," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "George and his mother, they've always been obsessed with money. I've seen the way they talk about you, and it's not right. They see you as a means to an end." His words confirmed my worst fears. George hadn't married me out of love, but out of convenience. I was a financial safety net, nothing more. The thought made my stomach churn. "Thank you for telling me," I said, barely holding back tears. "But why are you telling me this now?" "Because I can't stand by and watch them take advantage of you any longer," he replied. "You deserve better." Armed with this new information, I began to see George in a new light. His casual remarks about my income, his reluctance to contribute financially, and his mother's constant interference all pointed to one conclusion. I was being used. I started documenting everything. Every demand, every argument, every instance of neglect. I even consulted a lawyer to understand my options. By the time George announced his plan to move his mother in, I was ready. "What do you mean, divorce?" George finally managed to say, his voice tinged with panic. "Exactly what it sounds like, I replied. "I've had enough, George. Enough of your mother's meddling. Enough of your indifference. And enough of this sham of a marriage." "You can't just decide that," he shouted. "This is my home, too." "Actually, it's not," I said calmly. "The apartment is in my name. I'm the one paying the mortgage. If I choose to sell it, there's nothing you can do about it." His face turned pale. At that moment, the front door opened, and his mother walked in, holding a spare key I hadn't even known existed. "What's all this noise about?" she demanded. "George, is the living arrangement finalized?" "Actually, no," I said, turning to face her. "There's not going to be a living arrangement. George and I are getting a divorce." Her eyes widened in shock before narrowing in anger. "You can't do that," she said. "You're nothing without him. Who else would want a woman your age?" I took a deep breath, refusing to let her words rattle me. "That's not your concern," I said firmly. "What is your concern is finding a new place to live because I'm selling this apartment." The conversation escalated quickly. George and his mother hurled insults and accusations, but I stood my ground. Then, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. It was George's father. "What's going on here?" he asked, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos inside. "Your wife and son were just leaving," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He looked at me with a mix of gratitude and sadness. "Isabella, you're making the right decision," he said. Turning to his wife, he added, "And so am I. I've filed for divorce." The room fell silent. George and his mother stared at him, stunned. In the days that followed, I finalized the paperwork and put the apartment on the market. George's father and I remained in touch, supporting each other as we navigated our respective divorces. As for George and his mother, they moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were struggling financially, weighed down by debts and poor decisions. It wasn't my concern anymore. I, on the other hand, embraced my newfound freedom. I moved into a modest but comfortable apartment closer to work and threw myself into my career. A few months later, I was promoted to director of the sales department, a milestone I celebrated with friends who had stood by me through everything. Looking back, marrying George was a mistake, but it was also a lesson. It taught me to value myself and to never settle for less than I deserve. My story didn't end with a happily ever after, but it did end with something just as important: a fresh start. Months passed, and my life flourished in ways I hadn't imagined. My work became my anchor, and I discovered new hobbies that filled my time with joy. I even reconnected with old friends, people who had always supported me but whom I had distanced myself from during my marriage. One evening, I received an unexpected email from George's father. He thanked me for the kindness I had shown him and shared an update about his life. He had moved to a quiet countryside town, far from the chaos of his previous life. He had taken up painting, something he had always wanted to do, but never had the chance. Seeing his pictures attached to the email, vibrant landscapes and serene scenes, brought a smile to my face. As for George and his mother, their struggles deepened. Their financial situation worsened, and I learned they had to sell off most of their possessions to make ends meet. While a part of me felt vindicated, I focused on my own happiness rather than their misfortune. One afternoon, while taking a break from work, I visited a small coffee shop near my office. The cozy ambiance and warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee were a welcome change. As I sat sipping my latte, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. I was no longer the woman who let others dictate her worth. I was strong, independent, and in control of my destiny. It was then that I met Daniel. He was a fellow customer, standing behind me in line, struggling to decide between a cappuccino and an espresso. His indecisiveness made me laugh, and that small moment sparked a conversation. We talked for hours, discovering shared interests and a mutual appreciation for life's simple pleasures. Daniel was different from anyone I had ever met. He was kind, genuine, and had a calming presence that put me at ease. We began seeing each other, taking things slow, and enjoying each other's company without pressure or expectations. For the first time, I felt what it meant to be truly appreciated. A year after my divorce, I stood in my small but welcoming apartment, surrounded by friends and colleagues who had become like family. We were celebrating my latest promotion, a milestone that marked not just professional success, but personal growth. As the evening wore on, I found myself standing by the window, looking out at the city lights. Daniel joined me, handing me a glass of wine. "Here's to new beginnings," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "To new beginnings," I echoed, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. My journey had been filled with challenges, but each step had brought me closer to the life I was meant to live. In that moment, I realized something profound. Happiness isn't something you find in others.